was the first thing. This is being recorded, so we're going to send everybody a copy of both the deck afterwards. We'll send folks a copy of the recording afterwards as well. For questions, for those of you who are tuning in virtually, we'll keep an eye on the chat, so feel free to ask questions there. For those of you who are here in person, we'll pause for questions. I would say either speak up or say your question and we may repeat it for the audience. I think that's it on the housekeeping front. So maybe we'll start with just a quick intro on SVB, and then we'll introduce our guests and speakers today. So for those of you who are new to SVB or unfamiliar with SVB, we work with about 50% of all VC-backed companies out there on basic banking and financial services from day zero. And I mean, truly day zero, thinking of raising money at just incorporated, now all the way up to IPO. So we've expanded our M&A and securities division. So our hope, right, is that we can serve entrepreneurs beginning to end of the journey and from a 360 standpoint as well, on your commercial banking, on your personal finances, and whatnot. On the other half of the equation, so we have a lot of founders here, we work with most of the VCs out there and groups that back these startups. Private equity firms, venture capital firms, crowdfunding platforms, alternative funding platforms, corporate venture offices as well. So, we really want to bring both sides together to understand each other and transact in the middle, and hopefully we can play a part in that. I actually personally was an SVB customer prior to this on the VC side, so that's kind of how we and so we'll jump in with intros here. So my name is Andrew Oddo. I lead our startup banking team here in New York. We work with about 1,500 plus pre-Series A companies here in New York, and then hundreds of VCs as well. And Marissa and I'll let her introduce herself in a moment. We also specialize in what we call founder success. So what is founder success? It's a lot of these things, right? Events, guidance, pitch deck reviews and whatnot to help our entrepreneurs hopefully get from $0 raised to Series A, or at least enable their success and increase their chances of success. I think the most fun part of my job, we'll get into this, is we just see a little bit of everything. So working with thousands of companies and hundreds of VCs, we do a lot of data mining and reporting, and so we're going to cover a lot of that today. I'm joined by my teammate Marissa, who's right next to me. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Marissa. Like Andrew said, we work on our channel management and founder success initiatives here at SVB, working with all pre-Series A companies. Before working directly alongside Andrew, I was a relationship manager for our startup banking team, working with enterprise and consumer companies, and have a bit of experience there as well. And yeah, I'm excited to be here with you all. Thank you for joining.
Our special guest, Zehra.
Awesome. So nice to meet all of you and all of you who are joining us virtually as well. I'm Zehra. I'm a senior investment associate at Republic. Republic is a fintech platform that allows founders to raise from non-accredited and accredited investors. So our parent company is AngelList. We spun out of there around 6 years ago, and we see ourselves as like complementary to the VC process. And I think similarly to the values that SVB has, we are also looking to like facilitate founder introductions with other VCs, pitch deck review, fundraising guidance. And so we've also seen a lot of interesting stuff from the alternative fundraising side of things, especially with the way the market is going. So we're really excited to kind of break down all of that in this presentation today.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Huge personal fan of Republic for many reasons, but I also think hopefully you feel like this with us after today, but so much education that they put out there in the ecosystem. They have great, great community, different resources for aspiring VCs and for folks who are trying to raise. So Zehra, thank you for being here, and definitely feel free to check it out. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today and overall format. The first half of this, or third of this, we're going to go over state of the markets, just a pulse on what's going on out there. And we'll keep it pretty conversational too. So any questions folks have, we'll pause, we can discuss those things. And then the second half of this is really focused on like tactically, how do you run a fundraising process with VCs, with angels, crowdfunding, whatever it might be. I think what you come to realize over time is like 80 to 90% of it is the same. It's great storytelling. It's organizing the deck. It's thinking through your intros, and we'll put a slant on that towards like what's going on today and how to think about fundraising given the current environment. But overall, what is this? It's basically an articulation of like why you, why now, why this problem you're trying to solve for. And part of what I personally love about the conversation today and what we're doing is this doesn't just apply to fundraising, right? It's that star hire you want to make. It's your VCs, it's your first customers, right? The vision's going to be re-articulated in different ways for each audience, but some of the basics we're going to cover today are basically like sales and good storytelling, right? And in a world of a lot of digital noise and trying to be a signal through that, or in some cases trying to do that in person and virtually at the same time, which is hard. Like, how do you actually penetrate your message through to the right folks with the right orientation? So we're going to cover all that. Not one size fits all. We're looking at a lot of data from recent years, somewhat of a New York bent to this because we're here in New York. It'll be different for your hardware companies, right, versus perhaps your life sciences companies and software, but we're going to try and keep it high level so it's. So let's dive in. And by the way, folks who are tuning in virtually, feel free to use the Q&A now on things that you want to make sure we cover or throughout. But to start, let's talk about the climate out there. And even this data, I will admit, is a bit dated. It's only a few weeks old and still so much has changed, right? So for starters, inflation is up, but it's starting to taper off. That is a good thing, right? I think one of the most interesting things is we've already eclipsed this year the total amount of VC dry powder that was raised last year. What does that mean, right? For those of you like how the venture capital world works, basically they be raised from limited partners. They then seek to, yesteryear distribute that like a year to a year and a half or 2 years. I think a normal deployment cycle is that money you raise, you distribute 2, 3, maybe 4 years. But they've already raised a record amount this year over the record amount last year. So I think of that as like water behind the dam building up that will eventually have to be released, and we'll talk about that today. But for those of you who are actively fundraising, who do you target? You probably target those who have raised dry powder recently. So that's something to think about. The IPO market's dead. I think everybody here is early stage, so perhaps that's irrelevant or we don't care too much about that, but really, really minimal tech IPOs this year. And that's compressed later stages as well. The good news is a lot of those multi-stage VC firms think the Sequoias of the world, the Andreessen Horowitzes, the Tigers of the world who will invest all over the spectrum, they're starting to lean in earlier. That's that compression is really good for entrepreneurs. But it's no doubt a very tricky time out there. I mean, I think the biggest update since we put this slide together last month is certainly the layoffs that are happening, which are really challenging. But again, I think there's a silver line. I try to be glass half full. A lot of great talent out there right now, exceptionally good talent that's looking to get into tech companies. And so for those who are hiring, it's a good time for them. Anything to do with it in terms of what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think when it comes to VCs, and like this kind of comes into the conversation later, but targeting VCs that have just raised from LPs, I think it's a strategy that sometimes isn't as emphasized as it should be, because doing your research in your industry and understanding what funds are out there, but then even like sifting through them and finding the funds that raised, let's say like the last 3 to 4 months, I think can provide even more impact, because typically earlier on in the fund, there is going to be, I think, a little bit more, just like a quicker process, less diligence, less of a really extended process of actually confirming this. The tough thing is like the economy is getting tough, the layoffs are getting a bit intense, but at this point, hopefully it hasn't gotten to the worst possible place that it's going to get. I am kind of a half like a glass half empty person, so I feel like Andrew and I will complement each other, but I don't know, I'm still optimistic. I think it's still a great time to raise, and I'll get into this, but there are other types of fundraising, not just VCs, that you can rely on, especially from an earlier stage.
I'm being told that the speaker is fading in and out, so I'm going to switch to my laptop and we'll try and do that. So 1 second. How's this? How's that? Thumbs up? Better? Cool. So let's try this, and then Zehra, I'll move my laptop towards you. Marissa, anything to add on what you're seeing out there, new companies starting and what's going on?
Yeah, I was just meeting with a VC before this, and I think just in terms of some of the timing, as Andrew was saying too, like expect the process to be just a little bit longer in general. So what might have been like a phone call and term sheet the next day might be now like more of a month-long process. So I would just be prepared for that as well.
Awesome. Sorry about the volume, but it sounds like we're good to go. So thank you all for hanging with us. So, you know, I alluded to this dry powder at the early stages actually being propped up. You know, we are in good shape there. Again, I think the thing to consider here, what VCs have raised recently, right? Targeting those. I think if we use this term in the VC world because we want to be fancy like other worlds of vintage, which comes from wine, right? Wine, the vintage is when you are harvesting the grapes and processing that wine. Same thing with venture capital dollars. What year did you harvest and raise that fund? And so good way to look at vintages. You can look on PitchBook, you can look at Crunchbase for your kind of dream investors, and you can see, okay, like when was the last time that they raised? If you're not even sure who your dream investor should be, I like to say, like, look at the aspirational companies you like, you want to be like, start there, right? See who backed them. If you're not even sure about that, go on VC Twitter, right? Follow some folks who are kind of in the know and knowledgeable and thoughtful in the space, and you'll start to get a feel for who's a good fit. But again, dry powder looking good. It is building up kind of behind this dam. And so that's something to be aware of.
And many VCs share on like LinkedIn and Twitter when they raise an additional fund. So once you identify that list too, following their socials is a good way to learn more about that.
Yeah, I'll throw out like, I love that. Social media is great. Newsletters like Fortune's term sheet's good. Strictly VC's pretty good. Are there any that you like on your end?
I was gonna say Republic's actually launching a founder newsletter that is gonna cover different funds and their announcements of when they've raised. It's like the first thing that we're including in that. So probably more details later, but we're eventually gonna have that in the next few weeks.
Cool. So I think those are great ways to just kind of get a feel for, which funds are raising. Predicting the future a little bit, which none of us are good at, but it's fun to try and do it off of some data. I think that, listen, this year still going to be better than 2020 in terms of total deployment to startups, and definitely in terms of what VCs have raised. So for all the doom and gloom, 2021 was an astronomically historical year. This year is still better than, one of the best years on record across many categories. I think 2023, some of that volume will tailor off. It might be a more challenging year than 2020. But again, think about the geographies, think about the VCs and whatnot. And here's a little bit of a prediction into what that looks like. And again, glass half full in terms of the number of deals being done this year, still higher than 2020. I think to Marissa's point, plan for more time to raise, right? That round that took you like 1, 2, 3 months in 2021 is going to take 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months in 2022 and 2023 as well. Anything you would add to that, Zehra?
I think again, we're going to talk about this later, but there's a lot of stress right now with the way that VCs are deploying, and there are other types of fundraising. I don't think you always have to rely on VCs when it comes to fundraising. So although the data is interesting to look at, and we are still having a better year than even 2020, 2019, I always just like to tell founders that there are other options out there. And I think our industry as a whole does put VC on a pedestal as if it's the best type of fundraising, which obviously it's great and the industry is super mature, but there are other ways that you can fundraise. So I wouldn't stress about it.
Yep. Totally agree. And we'll go over the variety of different sources too, of course. All right, everybody's, well, we're here in New York, so just a little bit of viewpoint on New York specifically. Again, astronomically high compared to what we've seen in the past, even in many cases for early stage, even versus last year, many of the categories are high. But I think the golden question that everybody always wants to get to, which we're going to reveal now, is all right, how much should I raise? What do valuations look like? Let's cut to the chase, Andrew. I want to know the answers to that. First of all, I will say that this is highly, highly, highly dependent on your company, what you're building, what milestones you're setting out to raise for, right? Just to give you some more guidance though, and Zehra, I would be curious to hear how you guide folks on the question that everybody always wants to know. Raising too much, if you're lucky enough to raise too much in this environment, that's great. So I'll spend less time on this. But raising too much sometimes means you're diluting yourself more than you need to, right? $8 million, $9 million, $10 million seed round for a software company. I don't know. Do you really want to do that at that valuation and then have to grow into those metrics really over the next 2 years, right? And you don't need capital for beyond, let's say 3 years max, right? Then you should raise a new round and a new valuation. So on the upper end, I would just consider that. On the lower end, especially in this environment where I think raises are taking longer, with the exception of maybe like an accelerator into a pre-seed round, I really try to avoid raising twice in 1 year. Might take you a full year to raise, right? So like at pre-seed, at the least, I would try to raise for an 18-month plan or 18 months of runway if you can. We polled 5 big firms on what early stage founders should be raising for in terms of runway. And 4 of the 5 said 24 months of runway, 1 said 30 plus months. That was at seed. Pre-seed, you can get away with a little shorter. Anything that you would add in terms of runway or how much to raise?
Yeah, I think, well, when it comes to how much to raise, I think I like to say that not all money is necessarily like going to be presented to you at the right time, nor is it like good or necessary at that time, which I feel like sounds like a contradiction. But I think that being really, really mindful of your cap table and then also how it dilutes, exactly like you said, is pivotal. And when it comes to the valuation as well, I've had a lot of founders where maybe just because of the way that 2021 has looked, sometimes the valuations seem a bit low, but at the same time, when you think about the direction the market is going into and the valuations that existed prior to 2021, it does kind of adjust itself and go back to, I think, something that is more precedented and something that won't cause further dilution down the line. So that's kind of my perspective on this. I think that valuations are so also just dependent on the company. It's like a really annoying answer, but it really, really varies. But I am excited to say that I've seen some, well, excited and also kind of interested in the fact that there are some pre-seed companies raising at like a 25 million valuation and raising like $3 million. And some of these have closed like in the past week that I know of. So it's interesting. There's a lot going on, but I think being cognizant and protective of your cap table will allow you to also think about what your valuation should look like.
Yep. Well, and I think being thoughtful about who you raise from, right? Like not all money is created equal. You kind of tend to find out in bad times versus good times, right? When it goes away or you run into trouble. Same with your bank, same with your lawyers, all of that stuff. And so we'll get into the different types. But, I think the interesting thing here for me is that kind of the deal sizes and valuations have not changed a ton in recent quarters of the early stage. I would say what has changed is the total volume of new companies starting and how many rounds are being done. But again, because of that massive amount of dry powder that's sitting on the sidelines, if VCs want to do a deal and they've taken the patience to get to know you and vice versa, like they want to do that deal. They don't want to go back to their LPs and say, and we lost on valuation and amount of capital in this environment. The LPs say, what do you mean? You're sitting on a massive amount of money right now. So again, what should be emphasized here is not transactional, getting to know the other side, having thoughtful conversations with them, even slowing it down. I think this environment is somewhat beneficial for that as well. This was the seed deal sizes. Series A, not going to be, so putting a bow on this slide, right? What are we looking at? Average seed round, somewhere between $1 to $5 million across the US. For New York, by the way, the average seed round's over $4 million now, right? And then the valuation, which you're seeing on the right, going to float somewhere between 7 to 20 million-ish. And then for Series A, right, what does that look like? Again, probably around $15 million for your Series A deal size. That's the amount you're raising. What does that valuation tend to look like? Around $40 million, right? Like very, very quick math, right? Don't take this quick math and then go raise exactly on this, but you probably want a 4 to 5x approximately the amount you're raising against your valuation, because you don't want to dilute yourself massively with each round, right? 15%, 20%, maybe 25% fair dilution. But if you start getting outside those bounds, like I would start to think about what it is that you're actually raising. It's way more nuanced than that, but I'm just giving you like a quick kind of rule of thumb.
I think another good strategy too is when looking at companies that you might admire, looking at what their Series A raise was and what metrics they hit from their seed to Series A to get there is also a good strategy.
I think definitely thinking about the milestones between seed and Series A, and we'll cover some of that too. But like, talk to other founders in complementary spaces are your best friends, right? Getting to know them, who they raised from, why, the milestones they hit are great. 2 founders here that I met through a community called Pitch and Run, right? Like where, it's a group of folks in tech in New York that go for a run on the West Side Highway. They trade notes, they trade ideas, complementary spaces, but like, those are going to be some of your best friends in the journey early on because they can give you kind of the inside scoop on what certain VCs are thinking, what they want to see. Sorry to put you 2 on the spot. Just thought that was kind of a cool story. You don't have to be a runner necessarily to be in the know. There's this lunch, there's everything, right? We're not all getting up that early to run. That was the only time I did it, for the record. I hope to come back. All right, last thing on state of the markets, then we're going to get into the tactics of raising. Again, I'm glass half full. I think that there's a lot of great innovation that thrives in the midst of recessions and challenging things going on. I think the biggest thing, so here are some amazing companies that were born out of the dot-com bubble and the global financial crisis. But I think that why is this, right? There are 2 or 3 things that are really amazing to me. One is that you've burned the ships behind you if you're starting a company, right? Like, you're committed. There's not a lot of tourists right now who are like, maybe I'll like work at my day job and like moonlight this at night, and I'll leave if I can raise that $6 or $7 or $8 million round. Like, most of that has gone away. And so the ones who are here and starting companies are fairly committed and driven and willing to take the risk. That to me is awesome and impressive. The second thing, there is a very serious unlocking of talent right now, which, by the way, if folks are hiring, one of the best customer success people I've ever worked with, and one of the best sales folks I've ever worked with. I just chatted with them today and they were like, I'm happy to go early again. Where should I go? Like, this is like an amazing opportunity. I shouldn't be in banking. I should be working in a recruiting firm. Like, this is it happened a little bit in the pandemic. It's happening in a bigger way now, but like, that talent unlocking doesn't happen every year. It happens every 5 to 10 years at best. And then the third thing is, like, I think VCs are also more focused, right? The VC that did 12 deals last year is probably going to do half of that to a third of that this year. What does that mean? They're going to spend more time getting to know you. They're going to go deeper with you. They're going to have more time and attention for you, right? They're going to be a better partner to you because they're not trying to do diligence in a week to keep up with the FOMO and do the deal. They want to get to know you as a human, right? And like, what this multi-year relationship that you're going to have with them is going to be like. So those are my 3 silver lining things. Marissa, Zehra, what are your glass half full silver lining?
I think a
State
lot of what you
focus.
mentioned in terms of just like the quality of talent that is out there right now. And I think it's also a little bit more like VCs looking at fundamentals instead of like buzzwords and things like that. So it gives you time to really focus on like building the best product, addressing your market, maybe like talking to customers or beta users, and not having that like frantic fundraise energy that has been out there in the past 2 years.
Yeah, I would just echo the same sentiments. I think it's honestly a unique opportunity because I think because there is no like trendy buzzword, like everyone's really just trying to get into certain deals as soon as possible. I think VCs are going to be a lot more intentional, not to shade any VCs by saying that, but I do think that there is just more intentionality. I have run like a newsletter where I send deal flow to VCs, and in the past it was very yes, no responses. And in the past like 2 months, I've seen an uptick in VCs, like reaching out to talk to certain founders, having like longer conversations with them, providing them with feedback. So I think the slowdown in general is helpful. And then, I mean, you're really curious to see what companies do come out of the, like, I guess the next year or so, and what like titans of industry we're going to see in the next like 8 to 9 years that are going to get founded right now and funded right now. So it's an interesting time. I think it's a unique opportunity for founders to spend more time with VCs, and then of course see what companies come out of this and put a lot of effort towards growing and scaling after we get to this part of the economy.
There's one actually source of capital that's always been around, but I think is going to fare better in this time. And for exactly what you both just said, right? Spending more time with VCs to get to know them, the fundamentals of the business. I think the incubation scene and the entrepreneur in residence scene at certain VCs and certain incubators is really interesting right now. What do I mean by that? What even is an incubator or an entrepreneur in residence program? It's basically a VC saying, we like you as the operator. We're not sure exactly what the idea is going to be, or like maybe you're in healthcare and you're really knowledgeable about that, or Web3 or whatever it might be. Work with us on the idea, right? And we'll even maybe deploy some engineers for you or some talent folks or sales folks that we have on hand. We're going to ask for a little more ownership as a result, but we're going to tailor this idea together. We're going to slow play this a little bit more and then inject in some capital at a higher ownership. I think that's going to thrive right now because of a few reasons. One, those entrepreneurs I mentioned before that aren't going to like up and quit their job to raise that large round. They want that slower and steadier version of forming their company. And two, these VCs, right, have realized over the past year and where they got burned last year, we need to get more ownership, right? We need to be first against the mega funds. The way to do that is to go earlier, meet the entrepreneur at the inception point, really help them think through the idea and build that. So that's just one prediction I have. We're taking a close look at SVB around like incubators, EIR programs, accelerators that kind of have a hybrid to that. We were talking about New Lab, like New Lab's a great space for the hardware companies in New York that, you know, helps companies kind of bring their ideas to life. I would keep that in mind as like an interesting source of capital. Okay, let me pause here. Any other questions about state of the markets from either folks in the room here or folks who are tuning in? I'll take a look at the Q&A, but starting with folks in the room, any questions about state of the markets before we go into how to go about running the process?
I'm kind of curious from your guys' side. I think it's well known SVB takes like a venture debt approach as well. Like, how does everything happening in the market here in terms of equities affect you guys as well? Like,
Yeah,
does that change
yeah.
the strategy at all?
So the question to repeat for the virtual folks is, how does everything happening in the market affect SVB and venture debt? Listen, I think that the markets obviously affect the risk appetite of every player in the market that's going to distribute capital and do certain things. But one of the joys of what I've seen, again, I kind of facetiously joked, I know it's being recorded, I can say it because I'm at SVB, like you don't really think about your banker or your lawyer sometimes until stuff goes wrong. And then you're like, oh, it's actually nice that I know Andrew or Marissa and I can talk this through and they can think through like the different blends of capital. When cost of capital is low and it's everywhere, you don't think about that. When the cost of capital is high and there's a lot of risk and we see, you know, different disasters going on around us, you want that partner to talk to. So I'd say one of the beauties of us is it's never purely formulaic and automated. There's always a conversation around debt and or we have a VC that invests as well. Have we become stricter on certain criteria points? In some realms of SVB, yeah, of course, right? There are certain riskier sectors. But in other realms, right, like we're thinking about earlier stage lending and how do we do that? And how do we do that with trusted partners right now? We have a little more time and attention and bandwidth to actually explore that with those partners. So I think there's a balance, but how are things changing, right? Obviously, interest rates are up right now, but it's still, you know, most of your venture debt deals are going to be in the high single digits of interest rate percentage, right? So that's not as high as a credit card. It's not as high as selling off 20% of your company. I think the big thing that's changing is your debt to equity ratio. So how does debt tend to work for this world? Just to give a quick primer, you're going to raise a VC round from a credible investor, and then that hopefully de-risks the debt that you're then going to get. Why does that make sense? Well, it's not like you're a 10-year-old, you know, hardware shop where you're like, here's our revenue over the last 10 years. Here's our inventory. We want a loan to open another hardware shop. No, you're a money burning business who's in its infancy. And so we heavily de-risk that by looking at the cap table, what you're doing, a variety of other things. Last year, folks got a little more liberal with that, right? You might raise that $10 million equity round. You might take on 40 or 50% of that in debt. That's your debt to equity ratio. That ratio has come down, which is probably a healthy thing and good thing for everybody. It's probably down to like 20% now, which is where you usually want to be. And the terms have gone up naturally due to rates and whatnot. The cost has gone up naturally due to rates. So those are some of the things that are changing. But I think it's a balance. Like we've gotten more liberal on certain things with certain partners that are trustworthy that we can understand and lend to. And then the general credit box is tightened elsewhere. Happy to go into more detail, all of this situation. So happy to go into more detail with folks. I want to take a look at some questions in the chat. So Trends on sources of capital for venture funds. We're about to get into that, right? The different types, different regions. But again, I mentioned the incubators are interesting. Angels, I always think when moments like this happen, angels are going to fall off a cliff. And that actually is not the case, right? We didn't see it at the pandemic. We haven't seen that as much now. By the way, my reasoning for that is stock market goes down. Oh, angels must disappear. And it's not always the case, which is interesting to me. But we'll get into sources of capital. And I think that's it from here. Any other questions in the room here? No? Okay, we'll answer more throughout. Anything I missed in answers? Cool. A lot of coordination, but we're doing well. All right. Let's get into the actual process and the playbook to execute this. These are some questions we've already kind of asked ourselves, but like, what round am I raising? How much am I raising really and why? How do I get that intro? What is that first meeting? How does that go down? I think like we see what we see on Shark Tank, or we hear from afar what it's really like. And we're hopefully here to unpack the reality of what these conversations look like in practice. We covered some of this. So what round am I raising and why? And I would be very interested to hear, Zehra, from you, like for different groups of alternative investors, what does this mean? Forget the names for a second and the nomenclature, but I think what you should think about is milestones, how much, and ownership, right? Or tend to be the things that I look at. And so just to be super, super simplistic about this, when you're just starting off, all you have is the team and an idea. And so I always say like the mistake that a lot of folks make is feature the team, right? Lead with the team, have the team slide early in the deck. Think about what your X factor is as a team, or we've had investors here. I like this line that one investor gave us, like, what is the unfair advantage that you have as a team? Or like, it almost seems like you're cheating because that's how much of an angle you have. You're a domain expert, right? You came from the space. You've worked on this problem for years elsewhere. You have a PhD in this thing that nobody else has discovered or studied or whatever it might be. Maybe some other like form of that I'm not thinking about, but like answer the question, what's your unfair advantage as a team? What's your cheat mode as a team? I did this with Ben's son from Primary a few months back, and I love one line he had was like, would I be terrified to compete against your team? Right? Like, can you convey a story where it's like, if I had another horse in the race company that I've invested in, would I be really scared to like compete against Michael on different hardware for computers and things? Yeah, I would. So like, think about how you convey that story. And that's the pre-seed story heavily on top of like, what's the total addressable market, the opportunity. What would you say for pre-seed, Zehra?
Yeah, I would say honestly, like founder and team is pivotal for pre-seed, especially just not even like the assets or the accolades that you have, but also just the perspective that you provide. I think making that really clear to the VC is a huge differentiating factor, because people can have a lot of accolades. They can go to a certain school, they have a certain degree, they worked at a certain company. And I think that's great. But then when I hear a founder articulate all of this, and this is my perspective, or this is the differentiated opinion that I have in a certain space or a certain industry, or this is what's actually missing from this product that we've had in market for like 3 decades, that I think is super, super compelling. I think pre-seed is always like, all of these should be conversations and stories. I just think more metrics and quantifiable things happen as you obviously get later stage. But I think every single one of these should be a compelling like personification of the founder, and the company and what you build after that obviously gets defined by quantifiable metrics. But I think the narrative, the perspective, the idea, everything boils down to the people who are building.
Yep. I think, and one thing that I love that folks often ask during this session is like, I don't really get it. Some VCs are like, we go as early as possible, and then I'm too early, right? Or there's not enough traction. It's a super annoying thing, right? I can tell by like the most nods I've gotten so far in the room. So to me, right, at pre-seed and seed a little bit, but mostly pre-seed, if VCs are saying you're too early or I want to see more traction, you haven't de-risked. Like, it's a body of things that you need to de-risk. You, the market opportunity, the product, the competition, all of those things, right? And so if you're really, really strong on like, our people are exceptional, right? You're a 3-time founder, you've had billion-dollar exits, blah, blah, blah. You can afford to be weaker on those other things. And that's where you get the scrappy napkin ideas. And I remember when I just started in the VC world, I literally didn't get it. Like we found some of those entrepreneurs who, by the way, have turned out to be great. But I was like, this is so annoying. Like we just saw such a more buttoned up version of this. But they were very, very, very highly de-risked as operators. So they could be riskier on the other things. If you're a new founder, my advice would be, yes, think about like, what's your X factor? What's the cheat code, whatever you want to call it for your team. But how do we get so buttoned up on the other things in the deck and story? And we're going to get into that like, it's de-risk me as a new founder, right? I just know the market better than anybody else. Or I don't have revenue traction yet, but I've done customer acquisition interviews with 100 customers. Like I know this is going to work. Or, I've studied governments and how flying cars will work for my friend Carlos, right? Like you're just so deep on your plan for everything else that it perhaps de-risks any questions about you as an operator because you're new to the game, if that's the case for you. But when folks say you're too early, it's because one of those things is too risky and it's not de-risked by the other stuff. And if it's you, by the way, VCs are still very nice humans. They rarely will be like, I just don't think you can do it. Like they have to be pretty heartless to say that, even though they might be thinking that. So you got to kind of dig into that. Maybe you need a co-founder. Maybe there's a hole in your team somewhere. But that's like kind of a mystery to uncover. And that tends to be why the you're too early comes up, in my opinion. Seed Series A, as Zehra mentioned, gets a little more milestone based, right? Marissa mentioned this, right? You get into some more of the fundamentals as you approach those rounds. I mean, what do we see? We think about how companies graduate up from our startup banking practice to our later stage lending practice, but what are some of the milestones that you think are key?
I think some of the revenue metrics are obviously key, and that's going to vary depending on the type of company and the market. I would say like some of the key metrics like customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, what is like your LTV CAC ratio there, and just like really starting to build a story around like your revenue and expectations for future growth. Yeah, I think those are big things to consider.
I think the key there too is like story and thesis, right? Like lifetime value, definitely have a perspective on that. Anybody can poke holes in that. Anyone can poke holes in a lot of the things until the revenue is really solid later on. But like having a thesis around your cost of acquisition and the channels you're going to tackle is way better than, well, we haven't done it yet, so we don't know, right? Like I used to love meeting operators who were like, I ran my sales velocity, or like we tested a little bit, a couple $1,000s on like marketing on social, a couple $1,000s on focus groups, whatever. We at least have a perspective now, and we've started to do some trial and error testing. There's always revenue and cost of acquisition before there's real revenue and cost of acquisition. And that's by way of experiments, user research and interviews, right? Showing those foundational pieces. Definitely at seed. I think at Series A, you have to have like pretty real milestones there. I know like B2B investors are now looking for, again, 1 million plus in revenue is pretty essential.
I would also say being really honest about your total addressable market. Like it's not everyone, and so kind of like getting to like who you are targeting and being specific on that go-to-market strategy is key to make clear as well.
Cool. So timing, we talked about this, so I'll gloss over it. It's going to be weird right now. It's going to take more time. We're kind of getting to the end of the cycle for the year. So if you're not launching around like now, or like right after this workshop in the coming weeks, it might be good to have some friendly conversations to start to prime things, but really attack this in January, I'd say. Otherwise, you're going to be spinning your wheels somewhat in December, I would say. So I think that's all we got to say about timing, but I would expect it to take, half a year for a formidable round. If you're raising that pre-seed round less than $1 million, maybe it's quicker, but that price round, larger round from a VC, I would plan for 4 to 6 months, not with any individual VC, but just kind of working the circuit. And so what does that look like? How do you start? So one stat I like, I don't know how they come up with the stat, but DocSend said that the average entrepreneur starts with a list of about 75 VCs, and then they, get one that leads around. Again, I don't know how they have that data, but they do. I like to say, like, start with 30 to 40, batch these out. Who's the number one dream VC? Who's would be great? Who, we'd like to experiment with them, and then reverse that order. So start with the ones where it's like, I really want Zehra to be my VC. I'm not going to meet her first, right? I'm going to meet Andrew and Marissa from SVB, test things out. okay, work my way up, because it's an iteration, right? You'll get their feedback, you'll reshape the deck. So I'd start with those batches. Think about who the best introductions are for those meetings, right? Or best momentum builders. Maybe you're getting on Republic, you're running your crowdfunding round there. When does that happen? How does that happen? What's the momentum that builds? Like map that out. And then you refine each way, right? Each step along the way. But the key of what we're focusing on here for the most part today, we'll talk about different sources, is securing that lead. And lead's going to be the biggest check. They're going to set the terms for the round. If it's a price round, they might want to sit on the board. And they're heavily a momentum builder, because the thing about lead investors is they're kind of enemies, and then they turn into frenemies, and then they get their friends on board. If they're buying for your round, I'm not calling up all the other VCs I know and telling them about this. I want to see if I want to take this round. And then once I lead, I'll say, hey, let me get my angels on board, other leads on board, because I'm leading this and I want to fill the rest of the round. How do you think that, Zehra, how do you think like different alternative sources of capital play into this funnel? When should you meet them? How should you think about like Republic, for example, in terms of approaching you all?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. When it comes to alternative fundraising, and obviously I specialize with what we do at Republic, but even like AngelList, doing an RUV or an SPV, I think the strategy that's best practiced is, first of all, recognizing that you want to tap into your community, whether it's customers, friends and family, angel investors who might have invested pretty early and maybe want to top up with like a smaller check. Identifying that you want to do that when you're in the qualify stage, I think is important, because when you're going through this funnel and you eventually find a lead, that's great. But I think also recognizing and having a plan for the other types of fundraising you plan to do will condense the whole fundraise, as opposed to like spending time finding the lead. Okay, now I'm thinking about community. Who would I talk to? What would that look like? I think when you're doing the qualify stage, if you choose to do something on AngelList, something on Republic, you just start to like think, okay, who do I know that would want to invest? Is it customers, community, investors that rejected me in the last round? Surprisingly, we've seen a lot of VCs that rejected a company, but the analyst or associate who led the deal then invested in it, like on Republic or on AngelList. So there's a lot of people that I think you can reach into. My my whole perspective on all of this, though, is you really have to start thinking about it during the qualified stage, just to save yourself time. I think fundraising is an unnecessarily intensive process for a founder. I wish we could all focus on building. I think it's kind of annoying that that can't be what the focus is. So my perspective is, when you're building out your qualified investor list, should you decide to do alternative fundraising, just start listing out where you would tap into these communities, these individuals. Maybe you're scraping your email for all the rejects you got and reaching out to those VCs as well. And typically, like small check sizes, I think people are always looking to kind of continue to diversify themselves. So I would honestly like keep it pretty close. Obviously, when you do secure your lead, then you focus on Republic, you focus on AngelList, you actually start to like galvanize and get other checks in. But I think lining up the timing of what your overall fundraising strategy is going to look like, 80% lead, 10% SPV, 10% Republic, having that like kind of, I guess, perspective early on is super helpful.
So you agree, hunt for the lead first.
Mm-hmm.
Think about those other strategic sources next.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Okay, I think qualification, personally, not that I want you to ignore the rest of the whole presentation, but I think this is like the single most important thing in business, period. And to me, what this is, breaking down all these big terms and whatever, what is qualification? It's basically like, how do I make this first conversation feel like a second conversation, right? Like, how do I go into it with a little bit more research, a little bit more knowledge of my audience, so that it lands, right? If I walked in here today and I said, we're going to talk about like the state of the IPO market and how to prepare for that, you'd all be like, why? I just wasted like an hour of my time. And I would show that I don't know my audience. And you know, you've already taken what was 30 seconds of attention that you were meant to convert into 5 minutes, that you were meant to convert into a series of meetings, and wasted it. So in my mind, these are the things and the ways in which you qualify your investor. You should not be reaching out to an investor and saying, generally speaking, what do you invest in? There's enough out there that you should know that ahead of time. And again, I think like the psychology of humans is such that you basically decide, this is literally a survival mechanism. We decide in the first 30 seconds, like, are we going to pay attention for the next 5 minutes or not? Right? Like, is this worth my inner instinct to focus on and divert my periphery away from or not, right? And so I think sales coaches that have trained me, the best way to do this is, and we'll get into each of these things, but literally starting off your email, your conversation with like, hey, Zehra, the reason I wanted to reach out to you was this and tailor to them. They've then immediately said to themselves like, okay, this is going to be a decent use of time. This person's research, like there's some thoughtfulness here. We're going to have a conversation that is ever so slightly above the noise. And this is worth it. When I'll tell you a story. When I first got to SVB, I was still listed as an angel on a lot of sites. And so I would get a ton of inbound and I use it to invite folks to this. I would respond to everyone that was tailored to me. And I was getting like probably 20 or 30 or 40 a week. I responded like 2 a week because none of them were tailored. None of them were like, Andrew, like I see your ex B2B software and you come from the industry and I want to converse on this. No, it's like, dear Mr. My last name probably spelled incorrectly. Here's my blanket pitch. I send everybody and that's just erased and gone. So what matters here in qualification, right? Location matters. That's easy to suss out, right? You approach a firm like Primary Ventures. They only invest in New York startups. If you're elsewhere, it's not worth it. That's easy to figure out. And by the way, where do you figure this stuff out? Crunchbase, PitchBook, their website, their Twitter, asking other experts in the space. Sector, yeah, I think it's good to ask about that, especially if there are generalist firms, but I try to look at the individual I'm approaching too. This is a very human business. You're going to work with your lead investor on average at least 5 to 7 years. They might sit on your board. So, you have to develop that human touch to it. But I think the single most important things to look at here and assess are, what is their activity down to the individual, right? Trying to vet out, like, I don't want to approach them if they have direct competitors, but I also do want to acknowledge, I read your blog, I saw your Twitter, I saw these other companies you sit on the board of. Let's trade ideas on that. I'm happy to share my expertise around this problem that I'm studying. Would love to learn from you. That's like one of my favorite approaches because the best VCs and founders are intellectually curious beings that want to talk about this stuff. Vintage, you're not going to mention vintage to them, but assess that ahead of time, as we said. What is their sector expertise, right? That's going to play out in terms of how they advise you and help you too. And you want to approach the right individual or firm with that sector expertise. Size can be all over the place. That actually is something that's good to look at on Crunchbase, but I think it's also fair to ask them, like, do you lead and what size do you tend to lead on? Most firms are going to say they go early stage because they don't want to miss out. That does not mean that most of them are actually early stage. So I think asking other founders the size that they invest or asking them that is key. Those are my qualification things. Any that you would add to, like, how do you suss out what VC you actually want to approach or investor in general?
Yeah, I feel like I would emphasize size only because when you are also creating your qualified list of investors, I think you should divide it into like, these investors do lead checks, these investors do follow-on checks, because there are a lot of really cool funds that do follow-on checks that still provide a lot of value, even if they aren't the lead investor. And I think even like investigating that is worthwhile, especially because once you secure your lead, if you have like 20% of your round left, there's a lot that you can do with that 20%. For example, Goldhouse Ventures invests in basically all companies, any size, or like any industry rather, any stage, and they do follow-on checks. And although they might do like a 250K check, a 500K check, they have connected their portfolio companies to like Disney, and then they like have exponential growth. They go to Target, they go to Walmart, all in like the year after Goldhouse invests in them, and they're like a much smaller check. So I think even just investing time into creating like a huge aggregation of potential lead investors is great, but then finding those like small follow-on funds, follow-on check sizes that can provide a lot of impact. And part of that could also be, we have like 2,000 customers, they're all super enthusiastic. Maybe we'll email all of them and see, would you want to invest? If it comes back like 50% of them want to, maybe consider AngelList or Republic and add that to your round overall, and figure out what the average check size there is and how much you would want to raise there too.
I would also just say, in terms of the individual investors, so many investors put out their own content nowadays on like Substack or different newsletters that they write or interviews that they're in. And so that's a really good way to like learn about their perspective and see how it aligns with your product. And there's also a bunch of like different events that certain funds will put on. And so that's a great way to just like meet someone in person too. So be on the lookout for things like that as well.
There's a little bit of flattery there too. Like,
Yeah.
hey, I read your piece on that. Really inspiring. Would love to converse on that further and what we're building. I think investors like that. I want to touch on like 2, maybe 3 more slides. We'll jump around a bit and then we'll just open it up for questions. We talked about lead investor. We've talked about angels a bit, so I'm going to skip past this, but thinking through the intro. So I think this is also very important. And I'll point out some key things here. Cold outreach, I think that's okay. What's not okay is cold, untailored outreach, as I said, right? So like reaching out to someone, stating that reason up front, having it be personalized, permeates through the noise quite a bit, right? We met Carlos because we went to like a robotics event. We're thinking about robotics and written about that. Like that passion shines through or it doesn't, right? And so cold, tailored outreach, important. I think you'd agree with that since we met kind of cold. Trusted partner. Again, I think trusted partners are good. SVB, your attorney, your accelerator, but it really depends on the warmth and strength of connection on both sides, right? The best VCs will ask me, would you invest in this person and why? And if I'm like, oh, I don't know, like we just met over like a glass of wine at the event, and I don't really know them, that's just not really going to work, right? For that to be an effective intro. And then I think founders that they've invested in, right? So founders that VCs have invested in, they oftentimes also become scouts or angels that invest alongside the fund. And those are probably good folks to get to know, but same thing applies, right? What is the warmth of connection on both sides? Anything you'd add on like best ways to get intros or strength of connections here?
I think like something that I tell founders to do when you make your spreadsheet of all the investors you want an intro to, if there is someone, like I've done this for a lot of founders, they'll make like a new tab that says Zehra, and then I'll go in and list like everyone I know at the certain company, and then they'll forward me a blurb. I'll reach out to the person and say, hey, whatever, last time we spoke, it was so great to see you, blah, blah. Founder reached out to me, they're interested in getting connected to you. Here's their information. Would you want an intro? And I've seen a huge amount of those actually convert to the founder getting an introduction and the whole conversation moving forward. So if you do under like the trusted partner area, if there's someone who is like in the ecosystem, maybe on Twitter, like they're an analyst at a fund that has like nothing to do with you, but they've tweeted about the industry and they're getting a lot of like interaction. I think that's a good way to also find people, especially because I think analysts and associates are looking to make their mark. I mean, I certainly am. That's why I like do this for a lot of founders. So if anyone wants me to do that, like feel free to send me over a spreadsheet because I'm always happy to do that. But I think yeah, like diving into your trusted partners, making it super easy for them. That always takes me like 3 minutes to just go through the whole spreadsheet, put down who I know, who I don't. Maybe I know someone at the fund and might be able to get like an introduction. I just provide that context. So I think make it easy for the trusted partners, and then you can get a lot more out of it. And then I 100% will just echo that founders they've previously invested in is an incredible opportunity to get an introduction. I think that's like the best introduction that you can get.
Super simple. On the spreadsheet idea, I'm glad you brought that up. Here's what I've advised founders to: firm name, individual I want to meet, notes or compelling reason on why, and then the fourth column is like, who do I think could introduce me, right? But you got to arm that person with like the compelling reason, right? Like my reason for introducing you to the VC can't be a compelling reason I came up with, right? That needs to shine through from you to make Zehra's life easier, mine, and you're going to be more successful at that than we are. So just an idea. Any other ideas on intros?
I'll just echo what Sarah said about like the analyst associates at funds. So I'm doing a lot with what we're calling our pre-partner strategy here in New York, building out our network of associates and principals. And like these are the folks that are on the ground doing most of the diligence and taking those initial calls and screening them before their partner MD. So like when you think of a fund, you might think of the top person there, but there's a lot of people that help get to that top person. So be mindful of that as well.
Okay, we've got 6 minutes left. We can spill over a little bit, but I want to go over kind of another golden question folks always have. And we save it for later and spend less time on it because I think that people think this matters more than it does. So deck. What's a deck look like? What goes into it? We spend so much time on the deck. The truth of the matter is, another DocSend stat. By the way, if you're an SVB client, we have discounts for DocSend. I do highly recommend using it. It's pretty cool. You can password protect your deck. You can see analytics on how much folks read it. All of that said, DocSend has measured that the average time spent on a deck is about 2.5 to 3.5 minutes, depending on, how into it folks are. So again, you're thinking about selling in succession, right? That 30-second email to get them to spend 3 to 5 minutes with the deck, that 3 to 5 minutes with the deck to have hopefully a 20 or 30-minute conversation in person. For the most part, you're looking at these different sections for the deck. I thought Marissa, so I'll point out some fallacies since I think some of these things are obvious. Marissa made a good point earlier, like everybody's not your customer, right? This isn't a $1 trillion market. And for some magical reason, you're just going to capture, 2 to 5% of it. So I think on the market size slide, it's good to do a bottom-up analysis, right? Here are the individual types of businesses or people that might purchase this. Here's what we think they might spend. There's a lot of predictions there, but it at least educates the other side on a little bit of how you're going to go about attacking that market and what this segment is. What I like to say about competition is like either you're going to put this in here or VCs are going to go away and create it on their own. So you might as well own that narrative and say like, here's who we think our competition is, what they're good at, what they're not so good at. Some analyst or associate is otherwise going to be Googling around or going to G2 Crowd and coming up with a not as flattering version of that as you could come up with. And then, the team at the beginning is key. Traction. Again, I think there's always revenue before there's real revenue. Here's how many customers we've researched. Here's what we think our CAC or LTV could be through these channels or through these methods. So your traction might be nothing in the beginning, but it's at least predictions, research, conversations you've had before it's dollars and dollars flowing into the bank. Other things you think folks should consider with the deck on top of the obvious, I'd say.
I feel like your deck has to just be, especially when you're explaining the problem and the solution, obviously I'm not saying this to make it literal, but I do think that a 5-year-old or someone like 3rd grader, 4th grader should be able to understand what you're building. Sometimes I think, obviously, when you're very deep into what you're building and you're deep into your solution, sometimes founders tend to use a lot of words to explain something that can be boiled down to be very simple. And you have to remember that the person that you're talking to, like Andrew said, might have spent 30 seconds reading the email, 2 to 3 minutes on your deck, and they're not going to pick up all the nuances that you're aware of or the context and all of that. And it's honestly not helpful to them. So just keep in mind that you should be able talk to your parents if they have nothing to do with the industry, or a friend who also has nothing to do with the industry, and be like, do you understand what I'm building? And if they can explain it to you and it's pretty much what you're doing, I think that's a comprehensive deck that can really go out to a whole just a bunch of different types of investors. So simplify it, don't make it too complicated, and just recognize that you've sat with the problem and your solution for a long time, but not everyone else has, of course. So just simplify it and it'll make it so much easier for people to understand exactly what you're doing and just comprehend the whole thing a lot faster.
I skipped over one slide that somebody asked, so we go back to, and maybe we'll end on this one. And then if folks have to jet, go for it, but we have this room for another half hour. So if we want to go over questions. So, all right. So I do all this, I get the meeting, and we talked about the funnel and the process and timing, but what happens from there in that first meeting? First of all, every VC has somewhat of a similar process after the first meeting, but I think it's good to ask, what does the process look like from here? Don't ask, what do you think? Are you going to cut me a check today? It's just not how it works. They're probably going to do some diligence meetings after that. They're probably going to have you meet the rest of the partners at the firm. They might talk to customers. They might do technical diligence if it's highly technical. And that'll happen after the first meeting. But the first meeting, you have that deck prepped. And despite us using a deck here today, it's probably more conversational, hopefully, right? They might ask to pull up a slide or two. You might have it up in the background, but really you're trying to get to know this person over a 30-minute conversation and answering questions for them. Again, having that thesis on why the investor, you're going to need that for the intro, but I think that's a really nice, warm, natural way to start off the meeting. Hey, here's me, what I'm all about, but I'm really excited to meet you because I want to hear more of your thoughts on that company that you worked with. You wrote that piece on the space. It's just a natural, friendly way to start. I think that's usually my style. Don't ask for an NDA, right? They're just not going to sign that in the beginning. And it'll also be obvious that it's one of your first meetings with the VC because no VC is going to sign that. And again, I think it's fair to ask, what does the process look like from here? One of my favorite sales questions, like once you're a little deeper into it, whether it's with a VC or actual sales into a company, is, hey, I want to be respectful of your time. I want to block and tackle for you. I want to make your life easier in understanding this. With that in mind, can you tell me a bit more about what the process typically looks like from here? By the way, for sale, B2B sales, if they don't have a good articulation of that, they've never bought anything for their company before. So that's like, hey, I don't actually have a decision maker here flag, but it's just good to know so you can be like thoughtful about communicating with them. So that's how you kick off. That's how the process tends to go. And then hopefully a month after this, you got to check. Last thing I'll end with, and then we can hang out and do questions. This is part of our founder success series, as we mentioned. So we do a lot of different things. After this, there's a tool we use called Orbit, and that just founders up one-to-one to converse on things they need help with. So if you want to sign up for that, we'll send it out. Obviously, the theme of this Orbit will be founders learning about fundraising together or helping each other out. And this is one of many things we do here. So if you're a customer, get in touch. We're happy to tell you about more of this stuff. If you're interested in becoming one, our early stage banking is free, and we're trying to do more of this as well.
I think one other point to add, Zehra, when you were mentioning articulating the problem and solution, Andrew has a really good XYZ formula for that, and I think you should share that.
Yeah. So I think that it's amazing how we get to the end of 30-minute meetings and VCs are like, I met you, we talked, I still have no idea what you're building or doing. Like, that was too complex. And so an exercise I've encouraged founders to try out, and it's actually cool. You can send it to everybody at your company and see how aligned you are. It's called the XYZ exercise, which is simply, we're building X for Y to help them achieve Z. And breaking that sounds simple, but what you're basically doing is you're saying, here are all our main value props, the X. Here's our buyer persona, the Y, right? Who this is for. And here are all the different versions of ROI, which is the Z. Doesn't have to all be one sentence. It can be a few, but the amazing thing is, like, if you have a 10-person team, 5-person team, or advisors, or whatever, you send that around. It's amazing how different it is when it comes back. And then you say, okay, we don't have a problem here. We have an opportunity here. Let's think about what the best X is, right? What is the best value prop to highlight? What is the best buyer persona or two to highlight? What are the versions of ROI? And that becomes your opening slide. That becomes the succinct statement you put in your email. I came up with this because I was an account executive that had great SDRs that would book 30 or 60-minute meetings where I had a captive audience. But then I went to like conferences and I was like, oh shit, like, I'm not really good at describing myself succinctly and what I do. I need to like come up with a better version of this where I know I don't have 30 minutes of time, because you have 30 seconds to get 5 minutes to get that half hour. So good exercise. We can send that out as a follow-up if anybody wants it. For folks who are here, if you got to jump, I know we're at the end of time. For folks online, if you have to jump, same, but happy to answer more questions. We are going to send out the deck. We are going to send out the recording. We're going to send out our info if you want to get in touch. Active on LinkedIn, Twitter, and email, of course, too. So whatever your medium of preference is. Thank you all for coming by.